What's up, y'all? So today we'll be talking about the insidiousness of banking and essentially the long history of central banks being the central oppressive force in whatever the context may be. So big reason for the Revolutionary War was obviously there was a lot of things that went into it, but one of the main reasons was that the colonists, citizens, and large business owners in the 13 colonies wanted to escape from the oppressive royal monetary system. So they're paying all these taxes, paying all these tariffs, getting put into all this debt under the central banking system that was being run in the United Kingdom by King George, and they wanted to escape that to really create their own business ventures that would be free and uninhibited by any outside interests. Thomas Jefferson actually said at one point, "I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies." Thomas Jefferson said that in like late 1700s. So obviously then we have the Industrial Revolution across the world, but especially in the United States, this really takes hold in late 1800s, 1880s to through the early 1900s, turn of the 20th century. And you have mass amounts of wealth being created in unprecedented manners at unprecedented rates. So you have a few families involved in banking who had been around for actually centuries, but really came to prowess during the Industrial Revolution. That was the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, and the Rothschilds. These were the major families at the time. And they essentially called the shots for the entire banking system and wanted to ascertain more control over the American populace and over just the monetary system in general. So they needed some justification to create a central banking system. Essentially, they wanted to create a central banking system that followed the same template as the royal monetary system, and essentially wanted to create the thing that we set out to escape from in the first place. So J.P. Morgan basically created Panic, became known as Panic 1907, where he pretty much just spread a bunch of rumors that banks in New York were going to close. And, they had debts and people should be scared. And so people started pulling their money out and there's mass panic, and you can kind of, fill in the blanks from there. A Congressman, Charles Lindbergh, who was in the House at the time, put it really well. He said, "The King bankers put in motion a great scheme in 1907. They had gambled and speculated on Wall Street until so many watered stocks were created. The bankers knew the condition and informed their friends what was to come." Sound familiar? Sound a lot like today. So they're intentionally manipulating the market, creating mass panic, profiting off of it. But there's a greater scheme in play here, as Lindbergh said. So after the panic of 1907, the government starts this whole investigation. Lead investigators Nelson Aldrich, who had really deep ties to the financial industry and eventually actually married into the Rockefeller family. So he's heading the investigation. The conclusion he eventually comes to is, well, we need to establish a central banking system here in the United States to make sure that crises like the Panic of 1907 don't happen again. So there you go. Federal Reserve Act gets passed in 1913. Supposed to bring stability to the economy. Supposed to, basically they told the public inflation and economic crisis are going to be a thing of the past, and that's how they sold this. So they didn't want people to think that it was just the traditional central bank that they had been oppressed by less than 200 years ago. But it was exactly the same, because all money is loaned at interest. Every dollar produced is produced with debt attached to it. This means that banks constantly have to print money to temporarily cover their debt. So this obviously becomes a vicious cycle it's a self-generating debt system. So essentially, the public and the government are enslaved to the monetary system because they will never. There's no way to ever escape the debt that you are in. Regarding the Act of 1913, Charles Lindbergh said, "This act creates the largest trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power will be legalized." So what do you mean by that? Well, this act creates the largest trust on earth. They're going to create the largest single financial trust on the planet. So he's laying that out and essentially saying this will be the new governing body. This is where all decision making will come from. You will not have any. The representative democracy will be completely dead. So Lindbergh understood this really well. Louis McFadden was another guy who commented on the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. He said, "We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. The evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the U.S. and has practically bankrupted our government." So what he's referring to there is how from 1914 to 1919, the Fed substantially increased the money supply, resulting in a lot of loans being given out, a lot of people, borrowing. And then suddenly in 1920, they deliberately started reeling their credit back in. So this would obviously cause another crisis. More Americans lost money, small businesses closed, small banks closed and got absorbed by the bigger banks. And it was exactly the same as the Panic of 1907. The robber barons told their friends, they got out clean and they made money off the crisis and they came back stronger than ever. And, this is a strategy you can rinse and repeat so many times. This is basically the same thing that caused the 1929 crash, the Great Depression, which is what Louis McFadden was referring to in that quote. But there's also essentially the same thing that caused the 2008 financial crisis, where you have these robber barons who are just gambling and creating worthless. They're creating value out of thin air that actually has no backing, and it creates this insane bubble that will inevitably burst, and they can gauge when it's going to burst, and they can leave the economy, exit with all their assets before it does, so everyone else gets hit with it and they're fine. That's essentially, the strategy in layman's terms. Interestingly, too, regarding the establishment of the central banks, there was actually an executive order in 1933, and it required everyone by May 1st of that year to deliver all gold coins, bullions, and any other gold thing that they owned under threat of 10 years in prison. So, why did they do this? They're trying to abolish the gold standard. But effectively what this did, you forced the entire population to give you their gold, and all that for a lot of people is a lot of their material concrete wealth that you just force them to forfeit to you. So you're making them even more reliant on this flimsy monetary system that you have the ability to manipulate at your will. And it's all part of this larger plan to establish total control over the population with that Federal Reserve monetary system. Another interesting thing to mention with this whole establishment of the Federal Reserve and the banking system, as we know in the United States, is that in 1913, passed along with the Federal Reserve Act, was the Federal Tax Act. So this, for a few reasons, violates constitutions, but was never ratified by the states. If you actually look at the amendment in which the Federal Tax Act was ratified, not enough states, not the states required to ratify it, actually did so. The thing about this is 25% of the average worker's income is paid to this tax, And according to the Grace Commission, 1982, 100% of these tax dollars, these federal income tax dollars, are used to pay off federal debt. So you're paying off the debt that's being created by this never-ending self-generating debt fiat currency system. And so essentially people's tax money and the money that they're producing from their work will never actually come to any sort of fruition that will benefit their life. That those tax dollars, it's not like they're going to build roads or schools or hospitals or anything. They're paying off the debt from this horrible, this evil system. And it's designed that way. It's designed to rob the middle class and empower and embolden the ultra rich and continue to line their pockets. I mean, if you think about what Morgan and Rothschild and Rockefeller were able to create, is the ultimate money manipulation device was the Federal Reserve. You know, it's a private corporation too, and it gets to regulate itself. So it's as federal as, you know, like the post office and or that sort of thing. Even less so though. I mean, it truly is like this weird autonomous shadow organization that got created at the behest of Wall Street and big business. And unfortunately, those are the powers that still rule this country. And we're seeing the effects of that still. They're continuing to manipulate markets and screw people over. And, you know, 2020 and 2021 have been a testament to that too. We're seeing, you know, 30 to 40 million people could be evicted in the next year in the United States. And I mean, if that's true, we could be on the brink of another Great Depression, frankly. So really dark stuff. But I just thought that this was really interesting. Just the rosebud of how this entire central banking system was established in the United States. And I think understanding this context and this history can help us understand what's happening today a lot better and see through the BS, you know, because that's what history really helps us do. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you all are having a good weekend. And yeah, peace.